Bramble reporting on the world news from the RAAF Radio Butterworth newsroom. In an amazing turn of events in the political crisis in Australia today, we saw the Governor-General, Sir John Kerr, withdraw the commission of Mr Whitlam as Prime Minister, request Mr Fraser, the federal opposition leader, to form a caretaker government, and following the passing of the supply bills in the Senate, the dissolvement of both Houses of Parliament. The news in detail. The Governor-General of Australia, Sir John Kerr, has dissolved both Houses of Parliament after the budget bills had been passed in the Senate. A proclamation dissolving both houses was read on the steps of Parliament House this afternoon by the Governor-General's official secretary. Earlier, the Governor-General withdrew Mr Whitlam's commission as Prime Minister because he could not obtain supply through the Senate, and he called on Mr Fraser, the leader of the opposition Liberal National Country parties, to form a caretaker government. Sir John said it had been necessary for him to find a democratic and constitutional solution to the current crisis. He said the only solution consistent with the Constitution and with his oath of office was to terminate the commission of Mr Whitlam as Prime Minister and arrange a caretaker government able to secure supply and willing to allow the issue to go to the people. Sir John Kerr said that because of the federal nature of the Australian Constitution, the Senate undoubtedly had constitutional power to refuse or defer supply to the government. He said that because of the principles of responsible government, a Prime Minister who could not obtain supply must either advise a general election or resign. Sir John said that if the Prime Minister refused to resign or to advise an election, and this was the case with Mr Whitlam, then he had no alternative but to withdraw his commission and invite the leader of the opposition to form a caretaker government. Sir John Kerr said that the caretaker government would make no appointment for dismissal and initiate no policies until a general election was held. It was most desirable that the caretaker Prime Minister should guarantee supply. Sir John said the result was that there would now be an early general election for both Houses of Parliament. It was now for the people to decide the issues which the two leaders had failed to settle. The Governor-General read his statement ending Mr Whitlam's commission shortly after the Prime Minister had asked him to hold an election for half of the Senate on December the 13th. Mr Whitlam met Mr Fraser this morning in an attempt to end the crisis, but neither side would be moved from his position. The two bills, which the Senate has held up for more than 4 weeks, were the pivot of the 1975-76 budget and grant supply for the government of the day to carry on. Following Mr Fraser's commission as caretaker Prime Minister, the House of Representatives passed a motion of no confidence in him and recommended that the Governor-General ask Mr Whitlam to form a government. Mr Whitlam pointed out to the House that his commission was withdrawn as he could not obtain supply and that supply had now been passed by the Senate. The House was adjourned while the Speaker, Mr Scholes, waited on the Governor-General with his recommendation. However, before the Speaker had seen him, the Governor-General had dissolved both Houses of Parliament. After the ceremony on the steps of Parliament House, at which the proclamation dissolving both Houses of Parliament was read, Mr Whitlam made an angry statement to the crowd, which chanted, "We want Gough." Mr Whitlam said, "We may well say God save the Queen, but after this, nothing will save the Governor-General." He said the proclamation had been countersigned Malcolm Fraser. Mr Whitlam said Mr Fraser would go down in history as Kerr's Kerr. Mr Whitlam then exalted the crowd to maintain its rage and enthusiasm throughout the 4.5 weeks until the likely election date, which is December the 13th. The President of the Labor Party and the Australian Council of Trade Unions, Mr Hawke, who is currently in Canberra at a meeting of hastily summoned leading trade union officials from around Australia and the leaders of the Australian Labor Party, has called for calm on the part of unionists and said there should not be a general strike. He said the events of today could unleash forces, the like of which Australia had never seen before. Mr Hawke said Australia was on the edge of something quite terrible, and it was important that the trade union movement responded to leadership in this matter. In Sydney, thousands of people marched from Chifley Square and demonstrated outside the Liberal Party headquarters. In Melbourne, more than 3,000 people massed in the city square and were addressed by Labor Party leaders and trade union officials. The big march then followed to the Liberal Party headquarters. In Brisbane, the Liberal Party closed the doors of its headquarters as demonstrators shouted and waved placards outside. This news comes to you from RAAF Radio Butterworth. And now to continue, here in brief are other items of world news. The United Nations General
Today is the anniversary of the signing of the armistice which ended the First World War. But for Australians, the 11th of November 1975 will go down in history as the date on which the basic assumptions under which Australia has been governed for the past 75 years were overturned. Remembrance Day began with talks this morning between the leaders of Australia's two main political parties, Mr Whitlam and Mr Fraser. They met to discuss the political deadlock caused by the Liberal and National Country parties using their majority in the Senate to hold up the money supply to Mr Whitlam's Labor government. The hoped-for compromise did not eventuate, and it was later announced that Mr Whitlam had asked the Governor-General, Sir John Kerr, to call an election for half the Senate on December the 13th. This had been a threat Mr Whitlam had been holding over the opposition parties since the deadlock began a month ago. Then came the shock announcement that Mr Whitlam had been dismissed as Prime Minister and that Mr Fraser would head a caretaker government until a general election was held. The Governor-General said a Prime Minister who could not obtain the money to run his government must either seek a general election or resign. Sir John Kerr said Mr Whitlam had not taken either course and he had no alternative but to withdraw the Prime Minister's commission. After Mr Fraser's succession to the Prime Ministership, the Senate quickly passed the controversial budget. Mr Whitlam then claimed in the House of Representatives that since the budget had been passed, there was no longer a constitutional deadlock, and his Labor Party, with an unchallenged majority in the lower House of Representatives, should take over the reins of government again. From Canberra, our political correspondent, Tony Walker, reports on Labor Party reaction to today's events.
To say Sir John's action has angered the Labor Party is an understatement. From both in public and in private, some very harsh words could be heard about the Queen's representatives in this country. Mr Whitlam, the man who appointed Sir John, was even more outspoken than most of his colleagues. He went onto the front steps of Parliament House soon after the double dissolution proclamation was read and made no secret about his feelings towards Sir John. At this stage, there's been no word exactly when the election is to be held, but at a press conference late this afternoon, the caretaker Prime Minister, Mr Fraser, said it would be announced shortly. There seems little doubt, however, that it will be held on December the 13th, the date incidentally that Mr Whitlam had earlier in the day gone to ask the Governor-General to set aside for a half-Senate election. The mood in the opposition parties is difficult to gauge, except that Liberal and Country Party members appear just as firm by today's developments as Labor MPs. So far, only Mr Fraser has made any public statement, and that was restricted to a brief announcement to a press conference this evening. What remains now is the election campaign, and if the demonstrations around the nation are any indication, it will be an extremely torrid affair. Ladies and gentlemen, now may we say, God save the Queen. Of course, nothing will save the Governor-General. Which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary, was signed Malcolm Fraser. Go down in Australian history for the Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr. requesting silence for the next few weeks. Proclamation was signed after he had already made an appointment to meet the Speaker at 4:45. The House of Representatives had requested the Speaker to give the Governor-General its decision that Mr. Fraser did not have the confidence of the House and that the Governor-General should call me to form the government. That motion of no confidence in Mr. Fraser as Prime Minister and requesting the Governor-General to call me to form a government was carried by 64 votes to 54. In the Parliament, which has just been dissolved after going only half its term, the elected government was never defeated in any of the hundreds of divisions which took place in the House of Representatives. And you will notice that the Governor-General's proclamation dissolving the two houses was on the ground that the Senate had twice rejected 21 bills. At 1 o'clock today, the Governor-General told me that he would be withdrawing my commission and because I didn't have supply, because the budget bills were not passed. Before Mr. Fraser could announce to the House of Representatives that he had the Governor-General's commission as Prime Minister, the budget bills were passed. That is, before the Governor-General dissolved the two houses, the budget had been passed, supply was secure until the end of next year, and in the House of Representatives, the Labour Party had a majority of 10 on the last count. Ladies and gentlemen, we haven't yet been told when the election will be held. It can be held on the 14th of December. And I ask you all, in the next 4.5 weeks, to maintain the rage and the enthusiasm that you are showing now outside the Parliament.
That was the dismissed Prime Minister, Mr. Whitlam, talking to a crowd outside Parliament. Later, at a press conference in Canberra, the caretaker Prime Minister, Mr. Fraser, said that Mr. Whitlam's attitude had made the events of today inevitable.
Once the Senate made its decision, there was only one appropriate course of action for Mr. Whitlam to take. He should have called a general election. He refused to do so. I deeply regret that he did not take the opportunity open to him. A week ago, we proposed that Mr. Whitlam undertake to hold elections for the House at the same time as the next Senate election, which must be before the end of June. He rejected that offer. This morning, I called on Mr. Whitlam with my colleagues to discuss with him arrangements for Senate elections. These discussions were brief. In these circumstances, the Governor-General was left with no alternative. He has acted in accordance with his duties under the Constitution and withdrawn Mr. Whitlam's commission. In accordance with my duty, I have today advised to John Shaw to dissolve both houses of the Parliament so that the people themselves can decide what government they want for Australia. Before the Parliament was dissolved,
the budget was passed. None of the dire consequences of the setting by the Labour Party will now occur. Money for government employees and government services will now flow normally. I have today issued written instructions to the public service as a whole that all the government's outstanding debts should be paid as soon as possible. At a press conference on Canberra earlier today, Australia's caretaker Prime Minister, Mr Fraser, the senior lecturer in politics at the Australian National University, Mrs Cathy West, had this to say about the day's political drama.
Well, I think it's very interesting. I'm disturbed at the implication that it might lead to a polarisation of our Australian political system, in the sense that from the reactions this afternoon, particularly from the trade unionists, towards the reasonable...
Hello, John. How are you going? Yes, Dad's quite well. Good, thank you.